It is my pleasure to moderate this panel. I've been practicing on they told me that I should do a couple presidential debates first to get ready for this group. So this is our esteemed group. I'm going to do my best to make sure our time is equally dispersed between the individuals. But they are here to address something that they have for you, so that you are a part of this as well. So we're going to leave some time for some engagement, for some questions. Unfortunately, we don't have that time to have everyone answer questions, but we'll try to do the best we can to get some questions answered.
No, I think in all seriousness, I believe that building knowledge probably has to be one of our first steps, because I still think, at least in the mental health world, we still hear and see people thinking about trauma in very stereotyped ways and not realizing small traumas that happen in the children's lives each day that add up over time. And so I think it's just first just starting that language and the knowledge of what is trauma, how those little things can actually be pretty big in a little kid's brain, and knowing what we can do to offset those things matter too. So I think knowledge is first for me, but also then just the relationships, yes, with these kids, but I think these relationships that we're building here today are going to be phenomenal for us going forward. So these people in this room can be the force of change in our community, taking this knowledge then and making sure that you spread that and make those partnerships in your daily lives versus, I think it's really easy to come to these events and see it and be excited about it for the moment, but what do we do now? And so just the relationships that you've made today, like making sure that we capitalize on those. So my wish is that we do that, and we do that with intentionality over the next few weeks and months to make sure that we can make things happen for a little more change in our community.
Thank you. My wish, and it's interesting, I think, to hear everyone else. I think what I'm going to say, I think piggybacks a little bit on the last two answers, but this is the start. But the wish, I think, would be that we can get to the point where we all are collaborating and trusting each other within our own disciplines. And so I know one of the things that I think is the most difficult for me to experience or to see with what it is that I do is we've got some law enforcement officers here in the room that have been doing this for a long time, probation officers that have been doing this for a long time. The generational component to all this, right? When it's been doing this job long enough that you may have arrested someone's parents and then children, or you've dealt with them, you've been doing this for such a long time in the criminal justice system that you've dealt with them as a juvenile and now as an adult. I think that what we can each do within our own lane is certainly important, but it's developing that trust to when we're referring someone to a service, or when we're working a lot of times in the juvenile world, it's collaborative, right? We have CASAs involved, we have juvenile probation involved, we have DCS involved, my office involved. It's making sure that we can all, not that we're not all working together now, but trusting each other that when it's, when we are in our own lanes, but making sure that we can get someone to the help that they need if we're not the one that can provide it.
Outstanding. So, David, I want you to hold on to that. We're going to come back in your direction. But so we heard their wishes, their dreams. What are some things that might get in the way? What are some of the barriers that might get in the way of accomplishing that?
Yeah, to me, and I'm a lifelong Jefferson County resident. I know there's a lot of people in this room that have lived here for generations, and we've also had folks who come in from out of our community. One of the biggest barriers that I think that I have seen in a variety of different aspects in our community, and not necessarily always negative, but we've always done it that way, right? Some of the mindset of the mentality that, we've been doing it that way for a long time. And not suggesting that some of the things that we've always been doing, may be working, but it's taking a moment at times to ask, why are we doing it that way? Is this the most effective thing that we're doing? Is the data that we're receiving, consistent with our approach right now? And I think a barrier that we have experienced as a community at times has been, we've always done it that way. And sometimes that way may be correct, other times maybe we look at new alternatives to try to address issues if what we're doing isn't working. So that would, to me, I think, potentially be a barrier that I could foresee.
I think the barrier that I would most think we need to be on the lookout for is not staying so siloed. While I know the mental health thing really well, and I need to learn
Again, from an educational standpoint, I talked to Teresa about this morning. I've talked to other educators about similar things, but we realize, yeah, we are the ones that spend the most time with the youth of Jefferson County. But my biggest fear has always been that, well, it's up to the schools to fix this problem. And why we do have probably a bigger part of the puzzle than maybe other organizations, like I said previously, we can't do it by ourselves. And one of the biggest things with anything involved with education is finances. So to put together programs, trauma-informed, whatever you want to call them, that takes money. And everything we do, unfortunately, takes money. So I think maybe finding funding sources to do some of the things that have been proven to work is where we need to focus. So I think from that standpoint, one of the biggest barriers is probably financial.
So I think some of the barriers that can come to my mind, one is just that we often work in silos. I don't think that we, as agencies, we have great intentions, but we're all busy people, and we're all doing our own work. And so unless this becomes a collective priority, we continue to do that when we leave here today, right? It has to be a collective priority, and there's got to be a champion for it that drives it, and then we're all on that bus with them and helping participate. So I think time, working in silos. I'm also going to say not prioritizing mental health. I think many times, especially in education, people will inaccurately say it's because those kids are not disciplined, right? If they would just discipline them, be more stern, have rules and all those things, these kids would be running out of the school into the street. And in reality, we know, just from what we heard this morning, it's neuroscience. There's a lot of brain-based research behind that when the kids are fleeing, it's because they're in fight-flight. They're not in that part of the brain where they're rationally thinking. And so to just say that discipline's going to fix it and ignoring mental health is a challenge that we continue to face. So I think I see that as a significant barrier. And I think lastly is just not owning our own role in this would be a barrier. That each of us have a responsibility to contribute to the collective agency of the county. And unless we're all willing to kind of own that responsibility, I think that can be a barrier.
I don't really have anything completely different than what's already been said. I certainly think that old school thinking, as David Sutter said, can be a huge barrier, and that ties in with what was just said about discipline is the answer, because that's what's always worked, and I remember when I was disciplined, and I got through that, so no reason why every kid can't have that experience as well. And fortunately, we've realized that isn't always the answer, and in fact, discipline maybe has nothing to do with it, and it's more the opposite, that you have to figure out what it is that caused that and not how to stop it. So that would be the barrier, but the other part I think is really interesting, because we don't really want, when we're talking about these subjects, we don't want to talk about money. But you make a great point that funding can make a huge difference in the sense that oftentimes in order to address youth that have really specific trauma-related issues, is they need a lot of attention. And, Boys and Girls Clubs has a philosophy. We try to serve as many kids as we can in large groups and as efficiently as we can. And that is very difficult to then incorporate individual needs and trauma-informed care. So, as we all know, the way you do that is you go out and find funding for more people. And that's very easy to say and not so easy to do.
Outstanding. So we heard some, and there's a little bit of addressing of overcoming that, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about, you heard the barriers. What are some things you do to overcome some of the barriers that we talked about?
Well, there's a lot of creative things that Boys and Girls Clubs are doing. For example, you might not be able to afford to hire full-time social workers, but maybe you're in a community where there is a social worker graduate program, and you have, in effect, social workers that do student teaching in a club where they get to work one-on-one with kids and to address those needs specifically. And in the other one, again, and not that this is an original idea, but just to inform more people, to get people to understand that these are techniques that really do work on kids and really do make a difference, and we just have to keep building momentum with that. And then the other thing that you talked about this morning that really made a difference to me is this notion that the science tells us what these problems are, but the science also tells us how we can work on them. And this positive building of resilience is, to me, the single biggest potential for making things better.
So I think I would be remiss if I didn't start with saying the biggest way to overcome these barriers is education. I feel like I have to say that. So definitely education. I think that within that I mean understanding why this work is important. I think people in this room do understand that. That's why you're here today. But I don't know that everybody does. And so it's how do we share that message of why what we're doing matters. And sometimes you've got to begin with the data, helping people understand that this is a real problem that impacts them personally, whether it's the lost wages from families that are having to take off work to deal with mental health concerns. Or in our case, we decided to address it once we looked at our data from this year, and we saw things like 64 of our high school students have needed intensive help because of suicide concerns, 24 of our junior high students. When you start thinking about, 100 kids this year needing some sort of support because of suicide, that becomes very personal. I mean, those are our children. And the same can be said about the number of threat assessments that we're doing because of just violent and aggressive kinds of behaviors. Significant increases in that. Our teachers, as we've surveyed our staff, are begging us for help with mental health and student behaviors. We have more students than ever that are getting identified with special needs and explosive disorders with behavior. So when you look at that data, I think for us it became very clear that we had to address those things in order to be able to get to teaching and learning. So education, building the why, having a collective goal. This is one of our 3 big goals as a district, is how to address student needs and well-being, mental health. And then I think collectively sharing resources. So, we know we're investing in what we're investing in, and I told Jeff, if you want to send some students or some teachers or staff to some of our trainings, we'll open those doors and make those seats available just to build that capacity among both of our districts. So it's just sharing resources and being willing to be innovative. I personally don't believe in letting money stand in the way. I just never have. I think that if it's a priority, you find a way. You find a grant, you just figure it out. And I guess that's where I would stand.
Again, for me, the elephant in the room, and it does, in my opinion, boil down to funding. Not to say that, I think the Community Foundation does a fantastic job of finding money, finding grants for things. We as a corporation, school corporation, have to do a better job of finding funding sources through different grants. I think there are potential ways to earn or get more money for things like this. But just as Teresa just said, you can't let that be a barrier. So there are things that we can do that don't cost anything that can help the situation, and we need to make sure that we're doing those. Partnerships are big, and I can sit here and honestly say, like I told you, I've been at Southwestern for 18 years, and we've never had a good working relationship with Madison schools until now. I feel like Teresa and I can work together to do a lot of different things that we've not been able to maybe accomplish in previous times. And that's not pointing the blame at anybody, that's just stating the facts that the two school corporations in the past have not really done a whole lot together. And we need to make sure for our kids and for our county that we do come together, not only as educational entities, but everybody else throughout the county. We come together and do what's best for our kids in Jefferson County.
I think mine's probably kind of reiterating what's already been said of just, if the barrier is that we tend to kind of be siloed, then I think we overcome that by making sure we stay present and attend meetings. I know we're busy people. I know there's certain times where I'm like, oh my goodness, it's another meeting I have to try to carve out time for. But if we can shift that focus to this is another chance for us to collaborate, to be able to meet the needs of our community people, then I think that's where it's at. So yes, it's a meeting, but using that as a positive way for us to connect and start to come up with some answers and solutions for these things.
So what I had said, right at the biggest barrier was potentially people being stuck in a certain way of thinking on how to tackle certain problems. I think the way to overcome that is what we're all doing here now today, right? Like I said, when I started this, right, look around the room, look who's here, look not just at the number of people, but look at who everyone that's here is either representing on behalf of themselves or their employer or who they're volunteering with. And I think that we've already seen a lot of signs of that. I know, it's been touched on in a lot of different ways in this community, some of the impacts that suicide has had, especially with young people, and look at how as a community we've responded, right? It's getting people together, it's creating initiatives, it's what some of these people up here talked about, finding money, finding resources, or doing that, it's bringing people together, and, it's some of the conversations we've had about, getting out of these silos and doing things. It's, we're a community, we need to get out of this together, right? It's not like I'm going to solve it with just myself in my office or anyone else up here is going to solve this alone. It's, we need to leave from here as a starting point to then go out in our respective disciplines and say, hey, how we're going to apply this and how we can work together in order to solve the issues that we have.
Outstanding. When we think about solving those issues, is there one thing that you think this group, what you would like for them to go out and do as a result of what they've heard today? Any one thing to think about?
Yeah, I can talk. So I attended the juvenile and criminal justice breakout session and really appreciated hearing from the folks at Wayne County and what they are doing, what they have been working on in their community. It was interesting when they started off kind of going through and speaking that we have a lot of similarities, right, in terms of some of the things that impacted our community here versus what they have and where we are. They had talked about specifically a Handle with Care program that I thought was really interesting, talking about, if they know that a young person, a juvenile, has been involved in something, that through either law enforcement contacts, school contacts, that they can all communicate together and just let everyone know in general that kid may be having a tough day, right? So if that kid has behavior issues, there may be a reason behind that and how that could potentially be used as a way to prevent kids from coming into the juvenile justice system, or at least prevent, a situation from being escalated if everyone is on the same page, if everyone knows that that child may have been involved in something traumatic. So I think that the takeaway for me, whether it's that specific program or something like that, the things I liked about it was it seemed like everyone was on the same page, people were working together, and they were able to disseminate information out very quickly at the beginning of the school day to where, teachers, coaches, people in aftercare may be aware that a child may have an issue and how to address that. So I think that's something that seems like it might be a good fit here in our community, and I was excited to hear programs like that are out there that we can explore.
I think from my perspective, one of the things that I know I want to see right away is as soon as these videos get loaded, I want to watch the other sessions. I don't know about you all, but it's hard when you go to these conferences to pick one and know that there's other cool stuff happening and the other ones, like the programs that everybody heard about and that was in different things. So I think it's important for me and for all of you to go back and see those and see what else, and so we can continue that shared language of being able to kind of take these new exciting ideas that we've seen about and heard about today and then expand and see how we can use this excitement and energy to make those things work for us in our community.
I think from my standpoint, I would actually encourage, well, no, I'll even go a step further. I won't call it encourage. I will challenge each one of you to go back to your place of business, to your place of worship, to your neighbors, whoever you talk to, and tell them about today. Tell them about what you've learned today, and it is an issue, and there are real reasons for those issues. But the more people that we can at least maybe light a fire under, or at least start a spark, the better off we're going to be. So I do challenge each one of us, myself included, to talk to people about what we've talked about today, what we learned today, and let's see where it takes us.
So as far as moving it forward, I guess from my standpoint, I'm one of those people that likes to have a plan. And so the two words going to start chuckling. So I would want to do, a project management plan. What are our goals? What are our action steps? What are the strategies? Who's going to drive it? And have regular check-ins to keep moving it forward, so that it doesn't just get lost in great intentions, but there's actually an action put forward that begins to step-by-step drive a plan forward.
Outstanding. And the last thing I want you to really consider for the group is that I know you all are bearers of hope. Could you offer, or what measure of hope would you offer this group for today?
I don't think I'd like to be gone. That means I have to go first. I kind of like to be in the middle here. Measure of hope. I think the hope is in this room, right? As long as we're moving forward together, there's always hope. And I think the challenge is to just turn that into action. And I see a lot of people in this room who care about our community and about our kids and about one another. So it's just translating that into action.
I think just the ray of hope is that the word that's been thrown out several times today, resilience. These things can be overcome. Other communities have done it. Other places have done it. So, why not Jefferson County?
I think for me, the hope stands in probably another H word of healing. And what we see all the time, and yes, we see a lot of trauma and negative things in community mental health, but we also see a lot of healing. And people finding their strengths, finding their supports, and getting better. And that's what we want for our community is healing.
Yeah, I think, in addition to just, like I said, looking around the room and seeing that we're here, we're having these conversations, some of the conversations that we've had to have in our community are not always easy, so it's being willing to have these difficult conversations. But I think that hope can be seen, I know we want to see it at a larger scale in our community, but we can see it individually, and we all, I think, in our respective disciplines have success stories, right? People that we've worked with that have overcome odds, that have overcome obstacles, that have been able to deal with trauma and been able to heal from it. So I think, when I talked before about the generational component, how discouraging that can be, it can also be, equally as encouraging when you see someone who's broken out of that. Someone who maybe the first person in their family who was able to, purchase a home or, have a successful career or job or go to college or whatever it may be. We can see that happening. We just want to be able to see it happening on a larger scale. So I think the hope is that, there are a lot of people here dedicated to working on this and continuing to work until we can achieve a lot of our goals, but also we can see some hope and some glimmer in terms of, people in our community that have been able to overcome it.
Outstanding. And the last question, could you share with the group something you really appreciated about the speaker this morning? Just kidding. We've got some time for, and maybe there's a question or two that you would like to direct to the panel or panel member. Anyone have a specific question? Yes, please.
I guess this is more from an organizational standpoint. How would you approach employees that are maybe resistant to trauma-informed care? Like, how are you going to approach that with them? In an ideal world, you present trauma-informed care and it's like all on board, but I think that's one barrier that really wasn't talked about. Is that not all your employees are going to understand or get it or be on board with their care.
Right. Okay.
So what
Great question.
advice would you give to the administrative people here for that?
Great question. If you have Mike, would you like to address that? Or?
Yeah, it's a good. That really is a good question. It's one thing to say we're going to go out into our own respective worlds and our jobs, and we're going to create this change. But it's not just everyone in this room. There are other people that we'll deal with that either aren't here or entities that are represented, but not everyone may be represented on board. I think it's part of some of the things that we've talked about. I think it's getting people to understand, right? It's sometimes you hear these things and you might think, I don't know, or some of the things we've heard from other speakers have been like, well, that's those people, right? And that's not us. I think to me, it's getting that information, and I know you don't want to bore someone with data, but looking at that. Some of the most telling things is if you've ever seen, a lot of the ACEs, whether it's, movies or literature or whatever, it'd be interesting to see just a room full of people here, right? If we went and saw what trauma everyone in this room has been through. I think if you start to see it and you can convey it to people within your own workplace, we're not talking about those people, we're talking about everybody in here. This is how we all deal with everything. This is how we deal with personal relationships, work relationships, how the experiences that we've had affect all of that. And I think, I know we've done some good things here as a community, some community-wide data. I think getting that out to people at your work places can be helpful because it's not those people, it's us, it's everyone. And I think getting people to understand that concept may help get them on board with what we're doing.
Anybody else on the panel like to take a shot at that? Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
One thing that I've always tried to do in education, and education's kind of like the weather in Indiana. If you don't like it, just wait, it'll change. So anytime that you're trying to lead change, you're always going to have people that are on board and people that are not on board. And what I've always tried to do is get my people that have the most influence on board first. And then, so then it doesn't become a mandate that I'm trying to shove down your throat. It's, I've got these people that are all in, and they will help me shove it down your throat.
That is a tough one, right? We all struggle with that for any change we want to implement. I think it just goes back to having people need a voice, they need to be at the table, helping make the decisions, understand the why, the data, the background behind it. As long as they have a voice and input, and that we're listening, so we're also giving them a chance to give feedback, and they understand why we're doing something, then I think you can move people along. I do think that Jeff's exactly right. Having a champion or those that will champion it for you, the critical mass, also helps move and change forward.
One of the nice things about Boys and Girls Clubs is we don't have the levels of bureaucracy that some folks have to deal with. So change is a little bit easier. However, I experience all the problems that were just outlined. I think you just have to keep repeating yourself. You definitely want to have people on your side to champion ideas, but I will just go back to something I said, I think in the first question that we were addressing. These really aren't new ideas, there's just more knowledge about them. And something I used to say a long time before I'd ever heard about trauma-informed care is when I would be teaching young frontline staff, there are no bad kids. There's just bad circumstances. And so figure out what that is. And don't categorize kids. You know, one of the stereotypes Boys and Girls Club work all over the country deals with is that's where the bad kids go. That's where the poor kids go. That's where the kids that don't have any choice go. And while that's not true, it's also really not true anywhere where you would see kids with behavior problems. And that would go to our prosecutor as well. Those aren't necessarily bad kids. Those are kids that ended up there because enough people didn't pay enough attention at the right times earlier. So that's a little off the course of the question, but I think you just keep saying the same things and you keep repeating it until people start to get it.
Outstanding. Give our panel